Thank you. That concludes the urgent question. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 20668 in the name of Graham Day. On behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme, I call on Graham Day to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 20668 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 20669 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on timetabling of a bill at stage 1. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press the request to speak button. And I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 20669 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 20670 on approval of an SI. And I ask Graham Day, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move the motion.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to speak to this motion. This is a complicated matter, Presiding Officer, involving a UK SI in relation to the Scotland Act 1988. I do believe that, as some do in the UK Parliament, this SI is far too narrowly drawn and doesn't clarify which sections need to be removed to make the assisted dying bill competent for the Scottish Parliament. It would be helpful if the Scottish Government clarified which parts of the assisted dying for terminally ill adult Scotland bill do not fall within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. And at this stage, I'm happy to give way to the Minister if he wants to do that. OK, I see he doesn't. As someone who's vehemently against assisted dying, I cannot vote for this SI, as it seeks to allow the Scottish Government ministers to identify suitable drugs to assist dying. There is huge concern about the efficacy and safety of any drugs used for assisted dying, and as there is limited information collected from clinicians, and there is no on-label drugs available for the purpose of assisted dying, I'm not sure how the ministers will make this decision. I will give way. Sorry.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving way, and while I believe this is a technical measure before us, on the wider procedural issues, I wonder if the member has a view on the options that might be open, or what options are open to this Parliament in the scenario that this Parliament passes the assisted dying bill, but the UK Government, for whatever reason, hypothetically, does not step in to fill legislative gaps that are left in it.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the member for that. It may be beyond my exact knowledge of this, but my point is that I don't see how the Scottish Parliament can pass a bill that we're not competent to consider, and that it would have to be for the bill and the issues within the bill that need to further UK government clearance to be done in advance, and I've seen no evidence of that. But for the three reasons that I've already mentioned, I cannot support this SI, and I therefore encourage those people who share my concerns to abstain until the Scottish Government has clarified which parts of the assisted dying bill falls out with the competence of the Scottish Parliament, and how they will identify the drugs suitable for off-label use to assist in the assisted dying bill. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to respond. Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I begin by saying that I utterly respect Edward Mountain's perspective on the matter of assisted dying, but I would gently remind him we're not seeking to pass the bill tonight. We're seeking to facilitate some of the concerns that exist around the bill. And if you'll bear with me, I want to go through this in a little bit of detail, because I think he raises important issues that the Chamber will want, hopefully, a better understanding of by the time I've finished. Thank you, President Officer, for allowing me the opportunity to speak about the Scotland Act 1998 modification of Schedule 5 Order 2026, and I'm grateful to the Parliament that it has chosen to consider this order in such a timely fashion. As members know, following Liam MacArthur's assisted dying for terminally ill adult Scotland bill passing the Stage 1 vote in May, the Scottish Government committed to engaging with the UK Government to try and resolve the legislative competence issues identified with the bill. This was to allow members to make their decisions on whether or not to pass the bill based on their own convictions and those of their constituents, rather than on whether or not the bill is outside of competence. Work has taken place at pace to try and fulfil that commitment and to lay this order ahead of the Scottish Parliament's Stage 3 considerations. The Section 30 order modifies Schedule 5 to the Scotland Act 1998, which defines reserved matters for the purpose of that Act. It gives the Scottish Parliament limited competence to legislate in relation to the identification and regulation of substances and devices for use in assisting terminally ill adults to voluntarily end their lives. This conferral of competence is time-limited, in that it only extends to provision contained in an Act of the Scottish Parliament which results from a bill passed before the 7th of May, meaning only this particular bill. This was felt by the Scottish and UK governments to be appropriate, given that both governments are neutral on the issue of assisted dying and do not therefore feel it would be right to preempt any future legislation brought to the Scottish Parliament on this issue, should this bill not pass the Stage 3 vote. I will give way on that point briefly.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Just again on the technical issues, if the bill was to pass at Stage 3, then a future Scottish Parliament wishes to amend it further in this area would require a further Section 30 order, or we have that power for forevermore?
Minister.
Yeah, we are now getting quite far ahead of ourselves, but hopefully I'll cover that point as I go on. To be absolutely clear, the time limit only applies to the legislative competence of the Parliament, but this will not affect the future exercise of any regulation-making functions contained within the bill beyond the 7th of May 2026. To be clear, the time limit is for passing the bill, not making the regulations thereafter. The order enables the Scottish Parliament to confer a power on the Scottish Ministers to identify substances or devices by way of subordinate legislation. Members will note that this must be with the agreement of the Secretary of State. Similarly, the order enables the Scottish Parliament to confer a power on the Secretary of State to regulate such substances or devices by way of subordinate legislation. It is recognised that these are slightly unusual provisions. However, the UK Government was keen that UK Ministers retain a role in the overarching regulation of medicines and devices, given that this is a reserved matter, as they felt that this would be the best way of ensuring continued regularity and consistency across the UK. And I see Edward Mountain wanting to raise a question.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for giving way. I hope what I'm trying to prompt him to do is to ask if this is the only bit of the proposed bill that will require a Section 30 order. Or are there other bits that you know of that cannot competently be delivered by the Scottish Parliament?
Minister. I think, as the member knows, there is a further process, a 104 order that will have to be undertaken further along the line. I think he's aware of that. But in the context of getting the bill into the place that it would be reasonable to put it in just now before we get to Stage 3, this is the order that is being taken forward only in this space, in this regard. As outlined to the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee during Scottish Government evidence on the 20th of January, whilst the Section 30 order makes the necessary provision for the Parliament to legislate on the identification and regulation of substances and devices, at this point in time the bill itself only includes provision for the identification of substances in Section 15.8. It would need to be amended to include provision for the identification of devices, mention of which was first introduced at Stage 2, and for the regulation of both substances and devices. So there would need to be an amendment introduced at Stage 3, which can only be done within the legislative competence that this action provides. It is complicated, I think, as we agree. The inclusion of provisions around the regulation of substances and devices is to allow the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency to have a role in this, and members will note that Kim Ledbetter's bill also includes provision for this. However, I must be clear that exactly what that role would look like has not yet been determined. Presiding Officer, I'm conscious of time. I will try to get through this. It must also be noted that the Section 30 order only goes some way to resolving the legislative competent issues with the bill, and this is Edward Mountain's point, and there will still be a need for a Section 104 order or other measures to resolve the remaining issues. The details of what such an order might contain are still being worked through. As members will be aware, and I note that the Scottish Parliament Information Centre has produced a very useful explainer on this, a Section 104 order is only laid in the UK, if you just let me finish this point, is only laid in the UK Parliament after the royal assent of any bill. It was with that in mind that the Government opted to focus our attention on the Section 30 order in the first instance, given that it does also need to be laid in the Parliament, and it's therefore time-bound by the dissolution of Parliament for the Scottish election later this year. I'll give way to Jeremy Balfour.
Brief intervention, Mr Balfour.
Thank you, President Officer. The Minister may have just covered that, but can I just clarify, before this Parliament votes on stage 3, will we have clarity of what is in the Section 104 so that we know what Westminster will do if this is passed in this Parliament?
Minister.
So my understanding of where matters stand is that the discussions with the UK Government on what would be contained with that order are ongoing at the moment, with a view to ensuring that there is as much sightedness on this as possible for the Parliament, as he is seeking.
The Minister take a brief intervention just on that point.
Presiding Officer, do I have time?
We have gone somewhat over time for this item. I'll allow a little more time. Brief intervention, please, Mr Macmillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, just on the Section 104 order, usually, as the members of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee will testify to, we have been told in the past that Section 104 orders tend not, the dialogue doesn't happen until after stage 3. But with what the Minister just indicated, that clearly seems to be not the case in this time.
Minister.
So I think I touched on, I'm sorry if I've slightly misled there. I think I touched on the details of what such an order might contain are still being worked through. We do, of course, then have the situation that might arise at stage 2, hopefully not, where other amendments are brought forward which raise issues which would have to be covered by the 104 order. So by proceeding by way of a Section 104 order that would require the bill to be amended to remove provisions from it which would then be dealt with through the 104 order after royal assent should the bill pass. The removal of provisions would be necessary to bring the bill within competence before the stage 2 vote, as if the bill is passed outside of competence, there is a strong likelihood of it being referred to the Supreme Court. With that in mind, as I said earlier, members might want to be mindful of the risks of new provisions being amended into the bill at stage 3, which take it further outside of legislative competence. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government recognises the challenges that this poses for MSPs, particularly given the importance of the areas being discussed for removal, namely provisions relating to training, qualifications and experience of health professionals and to employment duties, rights and protections. However, this Parliament has a duty to ensure that any bill passed is within competence, and that is what we set out to do here. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 20671 on approval of an SSI. And I ask the Minister on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. And there are 10 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Ivan McKee is agreed to, the amendments in the name of Daniel Johnson and Willie Rennie will fall? And if the amendment in the name of Daniel Johnson is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Willie Rennie will fall. The first question is that Amendment 20653.3 in the name of Ivan McKee, which seeks to amend Motion 20653 in the name of Murdo Fraser on saving Scottish hospitality, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.